All right, I got a tongue twister to start this video. Which Witchwood card would you buff? Say that 3 times fast.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, I thought we'd talk about some Witchwood cards to buff. We already talked about Roscon's Rumble cards. We already saw Boomsday cards getting buffed in the game. There's still a chance we could get one more event before the standard format rotation where Witchwood cards are tweaked in some way. I kind of hope that happens because I'd like some of these cards in this video to get one last chance to make an impact on the Hearthstone meta. That said, I proposed some designs here that don't just change mana cost necessarily, but tweak them in some pretty significant and substantial ways that would help improve their playability in my mind. But as always, want to hear your thoughts and feedback on whether you'd like these designs, what other cards you'd like to see as well. That said, let's go ahead and jump into my list. Up first here, I have Lady in White, which a lot of people liked when she was revealed initially, but it turns out she's way too slow. First off, you got to draw her for her to do anything, which can be tough, right? Like sometimes she just doesn't show up in time, so building your deck around her becomes a real restriction. Beyond that, even when you play her like on turn 6 quickly, you got to keep drawing minions for these stats to actually matter, so she feels like a slow and kind of passive, non-reactive play in a lot of cases. And you'll detect a theme in this video. I'm trying to speed up a lot of cards that are currently enabling their effect way too slowly. So with this one, we take it from a deck-only effect to a hand and deck effect. That way, if you've got 3 or 4 minions in hand, you can follow that up on the immediate next turn. If you got more mana, you could even do something right away. So Lady in White's impact is happening more directly, much faster, and it's not reliant on like multiple top decks throughout the course of the game. That would all help her feel better the turn she's played. You wouldn't even necessarily have to build your deck around her as much because just a handful of things in hand might make her swingy enough that you're not like building out every single card so that she makes a huge impact over the course of a game. So multiple reasons I think this would help the card a ton. You can't make it a board style effect. That would be way too much like a crazy powerful bloodlust. So I think hand is a nice middle ground that would help Lady in White a lot. Up next here, I've got the Blackout Gunspire, card that it's been fun to experiment with, but just never quite gotten there. It's a pretty inconsistent effect. Not being able to attack means your opponent doesn't have to react to it at all in most cases, which means you have to kind of support it or build around it, which can be pretty tough. That said, what if we made the Blackout Gunspire the opposite? What if we changed can't attack into taunt? So not only can you take trades with this a little bit more proactively, but what if your opponent has to trade into it as well, and suddenly it becomes this real high-friction kind of card where they got to trade things in a smart, careful way, lest it wreaks havoc on their board, and it still retains, you know, that kind of Warpath Whirlwind synergy that you might want to experiment with as well. I think this would make the card so much more fun. Now, you might say, well, Regis, it's a tower. It can't move. How can it attack? Well, we can't see the bottom of it. It could be on wheels for all we know, right? Maybe it's like a siege tower that they roll out. So that's why it can attack. I don't care. It's World of Warcraft. There's magic. Just deal with it. It can now attack, and it has taunt because it's guarding a gate to the city. So for all those reasons, I think it's fine from a fantasy standpoint. But it would just make this card so much more interesting on board. You could use it in combination with lots of taunt stuff now, like Armageddillo and Taunt Warrior as well. So this opens up a couple new angles for it. It might actually be pretty strong at this level instead of like unplayable. It might have swung too far. This is a pretty good card probably, but I think it'd be a super fun one to see. Up next here I have Totem Cruncher. Card you probably haven't thought about much. Currently just gains +2/+2 for destroying totems, turning him into sometimes like a 4-mana 4/5 taunt, occasionally 4-mana 5/7 taunt, but you got to sacrifice some totems, and he's still kind of a flat play. It's not very reactive or quick. Like, it does have taunt, which is nice, but your opponent just usually pushes through these sorts of things, and you know, you've spent a handful of mana on totems already. Trading those in for this upside isn't quite worth it. But what if we made this card far more reactive instead, and he took those tines on his back and he eats totems to help them grow, and then he shoots them out at stuff instead, right? So he needs totems to crunch, and then he destroys all kinds of stuff by dealing 2 damage to all enemy minions for each totem destroyed. So if you destroy 3 totems, he's going to deal 6 damage. Arguably, you could even say this does it in 2 damage increments, 2 and then 2 and then 2, which has implications against reborn minions. I'll let you guys figure out which way you'd like to see that happen. But regardless, this becomes a card that does things, and it creates friction, because right now, even if Totem Cruncher were in the meta, I don't know if your opponent would really respect totems all that much, but with this, I think they would, because they'd have to try to protect their board. They trade into totems, so even just the mere existence of this card becomes helpful in more control style decks. So all in all, I think this would be a much more fun take on Totem Cruncher, perhaps even more fitting from an art and story standpoint, and just a more playable one as well. All right, up next here we have Countess Ashmore. A card people thought was going to be one of the best in the Witchwood, but despite seeing play in like a handful of really fringe decks, really never made the impact anyone expected. But what if we changed her draw mechanic here? Instead of drawing a Rush, Lifesteal, and Death Rattle card from your deck, which means you need all three to satisfy those three draws, instead she draws 3 Rush, Lifesteal, or Death Rattle cards from your deck. So that means essentially, if you have 3 Rush minions, she's going to draw all 3. If you have 3 Lifesteal cards, she's going to draw all 3. If you have 3 Death Rattle cards, she's going to draw 3 Death Rattle cards. You don't have to have one of each. You can just have Rush or Death Rattle or Lifesteal, or technically you could still have a combination, and that would be fine. So this basically opens her up to so many more deck building options by limiting those restrictions that she currently has. Now, clearly that's way more powerful because like a Death Rattle deck could draw all 3 Death Rattle cards and be super happy. Becomes a very powerful multi-card sort of tutor. Because of that, I wanted to lower her stats. You might say, well, why did you choose 3? That seems so arbitrary. Well, namely, you're drawing 3 cards, so that seemed fitting, but also, I feel like this makes her the perfect counterpart to Azalina the Soul Thief, which is also a 7-mana 3/3, and they seem like cards that are very much at odds with one another from an art and story standpoint. So we get kind of the good and evil aspect here. They're both doing different things, but kind of similar things in a lot of ways too. Maybe there's a storyline to explore there. So I thought that would kind of connect those things back together, would make this card more powerful because it's now a sprint sort of card with a body attached that a handful of different decks could use very successfully. It's not crazy overpowered, I think, although it becomes very, very good suddenly. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts there. But nonetheless, would bring Countess Ashmore into action in Hearthstone, and I think that would be a really good thing to see. Next up here, I have Forest Guide, a card I've had a lot of fun playing in Wild format, but has never seen a deck in Standard that I'm aware of, because mill-style game plans right now, where you try to force your opponent to draw things, just don't work very well without Cold Light Oracle, for instance, and Forest Guide doesn't quite do enough, because it's only forcing 1 extra card per turn, and for Druid itself, like drawing an extra card attached to a minion that's this weakly statted doesn't make sense. For instance, consider like Crystal Merchant, the new Druid card, right? It's much cheaper, pretty similar stat lines, often draws you a card as well, and doesn't have the downside of drawing your opponent card, which without a mill strategy, that's exactly what Forest Guide does. So if you're going to make a card like Forest Guide that's got this built-in downside, it's got to have 2 things, right? Either it's got to lean in super hard into that downside so that it turns into a punishment towards your opponent, or it's got to have way better stats. And in this case, Forest Guide stats are terrible, so what if instead it drew way more cards by drawing one at the end of each turn instead of your turn? So that means essentially at the end of your turn it draws a card, at the end of your opponent's turn both players draw a card, again at the end of your turn both players draw a card. There's like a lot of card draw happening, and at that level also it creates this interesting point where you play it, you get your card, your opponent gets a card, then they've got to decide, like, do I want to kill this, right? It's going to draw me more cards, which could be good or could be bad, depending on the game plan. But if I kill it now, I'm not going to get a card, right? Like, I could get an extra card. So they're kind of incentivized to keep it alive in a way, because it's at the end of their turn. So they want to wait to kill it until maybe later. And then you perhaps get to do more shenanigans, because you get even more cards. And there's all these decision points that happens, like, who's going to kill this thing? When are you going to kill it? When's the right payoff? Can you build a mill deck around it? I don't know, but making this effect bigger, happen more often, it creates those opportunities for a card like this to do something cool, so it moves it closer to that Cold Light Oracle kind of territory. So that's the change I'd like to see for this one. Now let's take a look at Deadly Arsenal. Do you even remember this card exists? Because I don't think most people do. But currently, Deadly Arsenal just shows a weapon in your deck and then deals that weapon's attack to all minions. So basically, it's a 6-mana AoE that's only good with like a couple of weapons in Hearthstone, because you want it to do like 5+ damage probably. So that's like Arcanite Reaper in Gorehowl, right? Because it's attack-based, not mana-based. But what if instead your Deadly Arsenal drew you a weapon from your deck? So you're not only getting a potential AoE, but you're also getting some card draw. And, you know, suddenly 6 mana drawing a Gorehowl and wiping the board seems really, really good, because drawing a Gorehowl is awesome. Drawing an Arcanite Reaper is fine. And suddenly this maybe even makes sense with smaller weapons, right? Maybe drawing a Wrench Caliber and dealing 3 to the board is fine, because you've drawn something they're going to utilize and you've thinned out your deck, right? it becomes so much better in that regard that I think this would become a nice option for Warrior. Now, I'll admit Warrior has a lot of AoE options right now. I'm not like hoping they find another one, right? But I think it's a shame this one never really got a chance. I think it'd be a more fun one. It's really cool art, funny storyline here with this one. So I would say get rid of like Plague of Wrath or some of these other ones, right? Lean into Deadly Arsenal instead, because I think this would be a cool take on the card. And there you go. Those are some Witchwood cards I'd buff and the ways in which I'd buff them. Now, this wasn't a super long list. I didn't want to go overboard here. Certainly, there could be way more. So I'm curious what you guys have to say. What cards would you change? How would you change them? And why would that be better for the game or interesting or fun? I want to read all these great ideas in the comments below. Shoot, if there's good enough ideas down there, maybe I'll make another video spotlighting some of them. I think that could be really fun. That said, if you enjoyed this video, you want to see more like them, of course, hit that subscribe button below. There's going to be more videos. There's always more videos because you guys are so very kind to me all the time. That said, thanks much for watching this one, and until next time, game on.